Hello and welcome to Phonetics and Phonology, this edition of Second Language Acquisition. And in case you can't read the subheading today, that does say the sounds of language. The voice TH, which we'll be talking about a little bit today, actually has the name ev, and that's what it looks like. And also you'll see there's what looks like an upside down E here. That's a schwa, which is the most common sound in English. It's the unstressed sound. So you'll see that a lot in multi-syllable words. Here it's kind of blended with the word sounds. Anyway, that's your first taste of phonetics and phonology. Let's move on. So a quick review, since this is an asynchronous video lesson, if you want to be a great student, you can pause and think of what these things mean. Look at your notes for just a second, because I will be revealing the answers. So what's a morpheme? Can you remember the two types of morpheme? Well, the morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in a language, which is something we discuss in second language acquisition class. So for example, the example that you hear in SLA is the plural S marker. So the S on the end of a word like cats is meaningful. It pluralizes the word cat. But the S marker is an example of a bound morpheme. So when you attach it to a morpheme like cat or a word like bird, it pluralizes the word, but it can't stand alone. You can't say, oh, I see people. Doesn't make any sense, right? So the other example of a morpheme would be a free morpheme. And another word for a free morpheme is a word. So for example, the article a in English, that's a free morpheme because it can stand alone and it's an independent word by itself. Or the morpheme the, or the morpheme we, or the morpheme apple. Okay, so anything that is a single morpheme but also can stand alone is a word. And our next question, do we learn morphemes randomly in L1 and or L2? And the answer there, of course, is no. There's a predictable order of acquisition in both first and second language. And in the case of English, we know from research that that order is very similar in L1 and L2. So, for example, the irregular past form of certain verbs, such as ate, drank, slept, tends to be acquired before the regular past form, which is adding ed. And reasons for that, which we discussed before, are it could be easier to acquire because it's a single morpheme, and they're very salient or frequent in the English language. Our next question, what does this mean for us as language teachers? Well, clearly we know that we can't trust textbooks to teach in the order that we know our learners acquire. And also, if we understand what our students have acquired, we know what they are ready to acquire next. And in that case, we have great tools for that, such as a retell task where they tell a story based on a sequence of pictures, and you can assess how many of the morphemes they've acquired and how much grammar they've acquired in their retelling, which we will return to today when we talk about a learner from China named Shui. So if a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning, a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound that affects meaning. So English phonemes could be p, b, l, r, k, g, etc., consonants and vowels, but it's only a phoneme if we substitute one phoneme for another and it can affect the meaning. There's an example, for example, if we say an aspirated k sound. An aspirated k sound versus a less aspirated k sound. It doesn't really affect meaning at all in English. It's just sounds like a funny accent, perhaps. But if you do that in other languages, you'll see that the aspiration can really affect meaning. One example could be double consonants in Korean. If you mispronounce a double g as a k or g, it sounds like a different word. So aspiration in English is not meaningful. Okay, so that's an example of what phonemes are. The other term we're talking about today is phonology. So phonology, you see the ology, so you know it's a study. Phonology is about the study or the rules for combining sounds. So how those sounds can be combined in a language and make sense to speakers of that language. You'll see some examples of phonology in a moment. Okay, so sounds, not letters. When we talk about phonology, we're talking about phonemes, not letters. What's the difference? Letters are simply the written representation of sounds in words. Letters are associated with alphabets, and some alphabets, some languages have more what we call transparent alphabets, which is to say what you hear is what you see when you read. And that can be very handy for a second language learner, but English, as we know, is one of the worst, one of the least transparent, one of the least clear alphabets in terms of what the words actually sound like. So let's go through some of the common mistakes that Korean speakers might make. This is one way that you can understand what we're dealing with when we're talking about phonemes. So our first example, go. A Korean speaker might say, oh, I see 2 phonemes. Well, you see 2 letters. So a Korean speaker might say there's g and o, so that could be 2 phonemes. But it's not actually this go clipped sound. It's not a short o sound, and you'll see in a minute what I mean. Okay. Our next example, a very common word, cat. A Korean speaker could say, we have k, a, t, 4 phonemes. But you see what's happening here is because Korean tends to have the consonant vowel pattern, they're adding a vowel sound to the t. And you'll see what the actual number of phonemes is in just a moment. And here's another one. We could say this word starting with B. Maybe your Korean student will say it's bite. Maybe a similar problem to cat, that they're putting an additional vowel on the end. So it's not actually 4 phonemes there. Well, not for that reason in any case. And next is a word that's similar to my first name. I hear this a lot. Kv. Okay, so a Korean speaker might assume there are 4 phonemes there. Okay, and you'll learn in a moment why that's not the case. And here's another one, laugh. Well, you might hear laugh. So is it 4 phonemes or not? Okay. By the way, this symbol you're seeing is called the ash in English. The ash is the name of that phoneme. So why was that a problem? Well, because these students were not really aware of the vowels of English, the diphthongs of English, and how each word could contain different vowel sounds. Now what you see here is a diagram of a mouth. This is actually where the position in the mouth where each of these sounds is produced. So we have the front vowels like your E and I, and a little lower E and A. is that ash symbol again. Okay, and then you have your central vowels, and very you can feel it if you say it now, and it's in the middle of your mouth. Your tongue is actually rising, it's producing it in that cavern of your mouth. And lower you have ah, and then back ah, and then back like book, and then oot like boot. So you can already see some of these sounds will be familiar to Korean speakers from L1, but others not so much. And one of the things you can do so that students are not constantly talking about trying to make the different sounds when they're referring to them, you can say, hey, let's think about names. Pete, Jim, Ted, Dan, Bob, Bud, Bert, Claude, Woody, etc. And something else I want to draw your attention to at the bottom here are called dipthongs. Dipthongs, you've seen this morpheme before, di meaning two. So each of those sounds at the bottom that's highlighted has actually two vowel sounds together. So for the purposes of our activities today, we're going to consider those two sounds. So Dave, that's two sounds. A-E. So what's happening is the one vowel sound is sliding to the next vowel sound. A-E. Next we have I, as in guy. So we're going from A to E. Similar thing, A to E. So I, you can feel it here, I. So guy. And next there's Joe. Joe. It's not Joe, it's O. Okay? Next there's cow. Ow. Now you don't have to think long to realize that's two sounds. That's ah and oo. And finally, joy. Oi. It's my mother's name, by the way. Joy. Oi. You can feel that there are two sounds there. Now in some dialects there will be even more vowel sounds. For example, in places like New Zealand, they're famous for putting multiple vowels in a word like no. So you might get 4 vowel sounds in there, the really thick dialect. Okay, now let's try that activity again. So we're talking about sounds, not letters. Sounds, not letters. And regular vowels are considered one sound, and diphthongs will be considered two sounds in this activity. So if you'd like to do this at home, you can pause and try it again, because I'm going to reveal the answers now. So remember we had go before? Well, go is actually go. Okay? This is what we're using to indicate the diphthong O. All the diphthongs will be yellow today. Okay, so it is 3 sounds, not 2. Because that O is not just O, but O. Go. Next, you probably got this one already. It's 3 diphthongs. K, A, T. But not kat. So, cat. And our sound stops because one of the beautiful things about English is we can stop on a consonant, no problem. Okay? But this can be tricky, of course, for Korean speakers, particularly when they're just starting out. So we have actually 3 sounds there. In English, the ash is not considered a diphthong. It's a single sound. Cat. And next we have bite. Now, your Korean speaker who said that it was 4 before was right, but for the wrong reason. So we have b, and then we have I, that's a diphthong I, and then t. Okay, bite. Say with me, bite. If you really want to stretch it out, you can say bite, but make sure you don't put too much on that t, because it's just a consonant sound. And by the way, the name of that consonant sound is just t. So don't be confused by the sound t. All right. Next we have the one that looks like my name. And you guessed it, we have 4 again. Okay? K, A. Oop, that's the wrong vowel. It's not K, T, it's K, V. Okay, cave. Should be 4. All right, here's another one. Ha ha ha. Laugh. 3 sounds, 3 phonemes. In my dialect, that vowel sound is an A. It's an A, similar to cat. Now, in other dialects, that could be an aw, laugh. Okay, many different variants, but this is a common for standard American English. Okay, so all those sounds are called phonemes. So there we go. Remember, diphthongs are considered two sounds. Next, we're going to look at an idea called minimal pairs. Minimal pairs. Here we're really talking about the teaching of these phonemes. So minimal pairs are words that differ by just one phoneme. So for example, earlier we saw cave and Dave. That would be a minimal pair. But it doesn't have to rhyme, right? Cave and Kate is a minimal pair because there's only one phoneme difference. Okay? Or we could have cave, kale. Okay? All of these things could be considered minimal pairs. So when we guide students to notice, because pronunciation is about two things. Pronunciation is about, of course, how well they articulate, how well they can produce the sounds, but it's also about how well they can distinguish the sounds. Part of the reason students have pronunciation problems is because they can't hear the difference, right? So it's important that we start with helping them to identify the difference, whether it's L and R or voice TH and D, any of these things. So what we do is we create minimal paired drills. All right, so we could change the consonant. If consonants are the problem, we can work on some consonants. So go, no, right? Or go, show. Or go, though. Or more likely, though, do, because that can be hard to hear, particularly with our next speaker who is shui. Okay? Or if the vowels are a problem, we can substitute just the vowels and create some minimal pairs that way. So dad and did. Dad and did. Okay? So if they're not used to the vowel sounds, they might not be able to hear the difference. Dad, dead. That's a big, big difference. That's a big, big difference. So it's really important that they can articulate that and they can recognize that. So part one would be getting them to indicate which one they hear. And how can you do that in a classroom? You can say, okay, if you hear the first one, show me number one. If you hear the second one, show me number two. Okay? Or left hand, right hand. Okay? Or point at the one you hear. Okay? Or raise your signs that you have, right? You can use any number of techniques so that they indicate which one they hear. And after they have recognized it for a while, perhaps you could add some productive activity. For example, they could drill their partners. Which one do you hear? Though, do, left, reft. Okay, that wouldn't work. Reft is not a word. Okay, so importantly about minimal pairs is that they need to be different words. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense. So we need them to distinguish in the context of real words. Now, if you are doing the shui minimal pairs activity today, you could simply come up with several pairs. They don't have to rhyme, but they do have to be real words. And you want to use TH and voice TH and D. And if you can't think of enough, you can use L and R as well. But then also please indicate if you would like them to indicate a certain way and how they can also produce the sounds afterwards. Okay. So minimal pairs, we've seen, we change the vowel, what happens? We change the word. We change the consonant, what happens? The word changes also. Okay, so that's the significant thing about minimal pairs is we're always talking about two words that differ by just one sound. So phonetics, as I stated earlier, phonetics is about how sounds are produced or which rules actually govern our pronunciation. And that's one of the things that new teachers of English don't necessarily realize is that they avoid teaching pronunciation because it's hard and it seems like there's no rules to it like grammar, but there are actually rules that we subconsciously follow when it comes to our pronunciation. And I'm going to show you one of them today. Okay, so this diagram allows us to compare uh, the distribution of vowels and where they're produced in both Standard American English and Standard Korean. Now, often we have students compare the two diagrams to kind of spot the differences. But what I think you'll find if you look closely is that there's a number of similarities. Right away, you notice a number of similarities. For example, E is not a problem. You have E, which is close to a lower vowel, like an E or A. It's kind of between A and E. Okay? So you have back vowels. You have A, you have you have you have U and O. Okay? So it's not that there are any vowels that are completely absent in Korean, with the exception of maybe the I. That would be a real problem. I is a tricky one for speakers of many languages, but it can be approximated. If you say beat instead of bit, I'll understand. But because it is phonemic in English, you want to be careful with words like beach and sheet. Okay. Some other, on a serious note, some other issues that you might notice is the diphthongs themselves are absent from both of these, but and there are diphthongs in Korean, but the way diphthongs happen in English, the vowels going from o to u or from ao to u. Some of these are similar in Korean, but there's not a lot of oi, there's not a lot of a that occurs naturally in Korean either. Another thing I'd encourage you to think about is the length of the vowels, because similar to I and E, that's a length issue. So if you get students to do perhaps minimal pairs with some E's and some Is, that could really help them out. Yeah, vowels can be a problem. Consonants can be a problem, but we can, if we know where the problems will occur, we can predict them and we can design effective activities to teach those particular points. And as I mentioned, there are diphthongs in Korean, certainly, but the way that they are determined, the way that they are categorized is a bit different from English. So a lot of these would not be considered diphthongs in English. Like when you're using the y sound or the w sound, in English we don't call those diphthongs, but in Korean they are. So as you can see, the diphthongs of English, they're always vowel, vowel, and we don't consider W's or Y sounds to be a full vowel. So other than vowels, what's the other kind of sound we can make? You guessed it, consonants. Okay, so these can also be a problem area for speakers, whether they speak Korean or another language as their first language. Consonants are categorized in this chart using two different factors. One of those is where in the mouth that the sound is being produced, and the other is about how much air is being passed or being allowed to pass as the speaker speaks. So just to give you a quick, easy rundown, we have the front sounds, the roof of the mouth sounds, and throat sounds. That's all you need to know. But if you're interested, bilabial, labial, two lips, labiodental, so the lip is touching the teeth, is in f, okay? Interdental, this is something unique to English and Welsh and some dialects of Spanish and a few other languages, I'm sure, but many of the world languages find this hard to produce, and that's the sound of the tongue between the teeth. And we also have alveolar and palatal. Alveolar refers to the alveolar ridge. If you raise your tongue to the roof of your mouth behind your front teeth, there is a ridge area. You can feel it with your tongue. It's like a bump that's there. That's the alveolar ridge. So your tongue is actually approximating that. It's coming close to that when it performs the sounds t, d, n, or even touches. And we have s and z down here, which is kind of barely touching. Palatal, that's the back of the roof of the mouth. And throat, you have velar and glottal sounds, which we'll talk about just very briefly. Just way back there in the throat. Okay? You also need to know how much airflow is going to pass for each sound. If you have a full stop like p and b, that means that that sound stops, the air stops. Okay? So all of these are considered stops. M, p, p, d, 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 n, k, g, ng. This one is ng, by the way. Ng, which is a tricky sound for some speakers, but Korean speakers can do that quite well, in my experience. All right, and then you have fricatives and affricates, which are allowing airflow to go through, but then you have the full airflow of the w and the m and l and the r, which is not stopped in its tracks. So all you need to know is it full airflow? Is it full stop? Is it something in between? And where in the mouth is the sound going to be articulated? And just so you know what these sounds are, just super briefly, we have p and b and m. You notice m is a nasal, okay? P and b and m. And down here you have the glides. You know the voiced glide. This one is w. W. Now the voiceless, maybe you haven't heard before this. And it's not very common among my people, but perhaps somebody you know will say wh, as in where is the teacher, okay? And then we have f and v, okay? Voiceless and voiced. These are fricatives. And here are the th sounds. You know, there's theta. This is the voiceless. F, and there's ev, which is the voiced th. Ev, okay? And more that are created in the alveolar area, t, d, n, s, and z. And all the way down here we have our liquids, the tricky ones for our speakers of Korean and Chinese and Japanese and a number of languages, r and l, where of course you have something in between, so you might not hear the difference right away. Okay. And now we have sh and j, which are palatal fricatives. Sh as in sure, and j as in genre. Okay, you've seen this word before, you've heard this sound before. And then the affricates ch and j. Ch like church and j like judge. Okay, and this is a glide which is just y. It's not the j, it's the y. Okay, so words that include a w or a y in Korean, they treat that as a vowel almost, the y sound. Okay, velar k, g, ng. Okay, and your glottals, the one that you know is the h, and the question mark is what we call a glottal stop. Glottal stop is pretty uncommon, but you might have heard it. My name, for example, could be pronounced with a glottal stop. Norton. That means the sound just stops back here. Norton. Or button. Okay? It's common in other dialects, not so much in mine. Okay? So what is the difference between these on the left and these on the right? I wonder if you can determine that. You might have guessed it. These on the left are voiceless, while these on the right are voiced. You can feel the difference if you put your fingers up to your throat. S, no buzz. Z, buzz. Okay. P, 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 no buzz. B, buzz. Okay. So why am I saying buzz and not voiced and voiceless? Because this is the kind of thing you'll be doing with your students. So remember to keep that meta language easy for them. T, 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 d, 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 k, 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 g, g, g. All right. So if you're watching this for the answers, I can reveal the answers right now. If not, if you want to participate, you can write somewhere where is the place that these sounds are articulated and the amount of airflow, because I'm going to reveal those answers right now. F is happening in the front of the mouth. Okay, that's full airflow. And if you want to be a language nerd about it, that's a voiceless labiodental fricative. Okay, and our next candidate is the G. Back of the mouth, full stop, a voiced velar stop. Okay, G, G, G. And last one is front of the mouth, full airflow. That's Z. It's up in the front. That's buzzing by the alveolar ridge behind your front teeth. Z. Okay. Voiced alveolar fricative. Good times. What else? What have we talked about so far? Well, we've talked about phonetics. If we know all of the individual sounds of a language, is that enough to speak the language well? Perfectly. I don't like that word. The answer here, of course, is not. Let's think about one of those tricky rules of phonology that we can say right now. So, phonology, it's about, as I said, how sounds are combined and how they might affect the pronunciation based on the sounds that are around them or the phonemic environment. So we have a word, for example, like bookmark, which a native English speaker can probably say with little to no difficulty. But if you ask a Korean speaker, even at an advanced level of English to pronounce this, they may very well say bookmark, because for the Korean speaker, there is a rule about what happens when you combine a k sound with a nasal like this, and that rule is actually quite logical, right? The k is going to become the ng, bookmark, because it's closer, it's articulated nearby. Okay, and so this happens all over the place in language, and it's actually kind of interesting. And if we can recognize it, then we can teach our students how to correct that problem. It's called assimilation. In some places it's called elision. Assimilation is when two sounds come together and assimilate, so they sound similar because they're nearby. Elision is when one sound disappears. Okay, there's a stronger sound that just kind of makes it go away. So here's one that we're all aware of. Suk plus myung. Does this create suk myung? Only if you're me. When I first arrived here, I work at suk myung, and I sounded like an alien. But you might say sung myung. Why? Why do you do that? You do it because of this process of assimilation. Okay, so that velar sound k meets the nasal and it becomes, guess what? It becomes a velar nasal. Okay, why? Well, here's some more. Now, if you will humor me and my silly pronunciation, you will probably not say 밥 먹었어. You'll probably say 밥 먹었어. So what happens is the b is either becoming a m, which would be assimilation, or is disappearing in the pronunciation, which is elision. 밥 먹었어. Okay, so this is a process that is happening even in Korean. What if you go down to the convenience store and you would like to get some 10-liter garbage bags? Would you say shiprita? Probably not. It sounds a little bit more like shimnita. Okay? So we have, it's becoming shimrita. I can barely say it myself because my mind wants to say this word sheep and this word rita. Okay? There's another one. This is an area near where I used to live. Near Itaewon, Haebangchon area, there's an area called not Gyeongri-dan, but Gyeongni-dan. Okay, so we have sounds coming together and influencing each other. This is called assimilation. And here's one that our students might not get right away, but if you've been watching TV for a few years here in Korea, you might have seen these ladies and their famous song, Pick Me, Pick Me, Pick Me Up, which you know, I'm sure you're aware, sounds a little more like ping me, ping me, ping me up. Okay, so what we're seeing here is the influence of the rules of Korean assimilation, that phonemic environment influencing the sounds, and it's now affecting the expression of English. So if you're aware that this is going to happen, you can design activities that will help your students to produce these consonant clusters like pick me, rather than ping me. Okay, so that's assimilation. I think it's fun, and it's useful for us as teachers. And of course, assimilation also happens in English rather naturally. We have words such as this one is not actually cupboard. We have cupboard, which is more of elision. That P sound is actually going away. Cupboard. Okay. We have, here's a tricky one, handbag. We have actually 3 consonants in a row. Guess what that becomes? Hambag. Hambag, yeah, like hamburger. Okay, so hambag. You'll notice that kind of assimilation happening. And it happens when words are together, such as his son and his daughter. Okay, let me say that again. I was articulating too strongly. We say his son, you notice the z goes away. Normally that is pronounced, obviously, his z. But here's his son. It becomes devoiced, becomes voiceless, because the next word is voiceless. His son. But when we have daughter, which is voiced meets voiced, it's his daughter, his son. His daughter, his son. So again, the phonemic environment influencing the way those words are articulated. So what English sounds will be problematic, for example? What English sounds will be problematic for your students? Well, I already have etc. We could think about b and v. I remember being called debut quite often. Particularly, it was amusing to me when I first arrived. Now I respond to debut. Okay, we have the L sound and the R sound, obviously, because the sound that exists in Korean is somewhere in between. We have the J and Z, okay, and why is that? Because we have an absence of a true Z in Korean. So there's pija, right? Here we go. So now for our main activity, we're going to analyze a Chinese English learner named Hui. If you experienced the live online lesson, there's nothing for you to do here except maybe check out the answers. If you did not, there is a simple task which asks you to create some minimal pairs for Shui. So let's look at our answers. Blah, blah, blah. She has problems with the voice TH. Okay, so here's the answers on the transcript. There were quite a number of voice TH, and you might be wondering what the purpose of an activity like this is, but actually, even for your students, or even for our TESOL students, it can be it can be a useful noticing activity, you know, whatever sound you're focusing on. And so you can do this when you're focusing on pronunciation, go through and highlight everything with this sound. Or even better, if the sound is not the way it's spelled, right? So, for example, his, as we saw earlier, his daughter. Highlight every time there's a z sound, even if it looks like an s. That can be really, really enlightening. So there's a number of voiced th here. And then you saw the analysis by the experts. There's incorrect use, and they counted it on a number of lines, and there's some reasons for that, which we'll look at now. And correct use, it's hard for them. Many of them are front of the blackboard. Let's look at some reasons why. Well, we wonder why this could be. So we need to think again about the environment where this voiced th is happening. And think about, sort of like when we looked at morphology, the frequency of these phrases or words that she's using, and how much cognitive processing is involved when she's trying to produce it. Language learning is systematic, meaning that even errors are systematic, which you know we refer to that as interlanguage. So what did the experts say? Well, after the prepositions of and for in this small sample, she seems to produce it correctly. Let's say that again. So after the prepositions of and for, she appears to produce that correctly. So maybe, this is the idea they had, maybe the consonants that came before are fricatives or glides that helps her produce the. So again, the environment in the mouth where those sounds are produced. We certainly need more examples to be for sure. And she's producing it correctly in the medial position after vowels. So in the middle of a word or prepositional phrase after a vowel. Words like other. Or as a first sound after a pause, she can articulate it freely. I have some additional ideas, and I don't know what you guys came up with, but similarly, what we have here is what's dat? What's dat? Host siblings, what's dat? So maybe when she's coming off of a s, she gets it incorrect. Okay, that's possible. Or she could be processing this new word, she's focusing on this new idea, and so she's like host siblings, what that means, and so she's unable to naturally produce that sound as she's cognitively processing. This could very much be part of it. Don't like them, language, another language. She says language, another language. Well, again, in the middle of a word, it could be tricky. Maybe going from something like a nasal, like n to d is easier than n to th, which requires some acrobatics of the tongue. With the udder in the middle, it's tricky for them. The other thing I was going to mention, in these prepositional phrases, why would this be correct? Hard for them, many of them, front of the blackboard. Okay, hard for them. How often do you think she might have used that phrase, for them? For them it's easy, for them it's hard. How often do you think she might have said many of them, many of them, many of them, many of those, many of them, some of them, many of them? So you also have an element of frequency here. So perhaps that's why she's able to articulate it, because she has memorized it as a chunk, which would be a sign of a good learner, actually, to notice those chunks and to memorize them. Because she correctly says, if I recall correctly, she says many of them. She doesn't say many of them, which would actually be harder. And the way the native speakers will say it is many of them, many of them, many of them, together quickly. And of course, front of the blackboard, that would also be something that's very, very commonly said, that of the prepositional phrase. Okay, so those are some additional ideas. Be interested to hear what you guys came up with as well. So, methodology connection. this is not for the video class, but there are interesting pronunciation activities that happen in the live class, and I'd be interested to hear what those are. And here's a teaching tip from the Shui study. They said, well, maybe what you could do is draw her attention as a noticing activity to those contexts where she's getting that word wrong. She's getting that sound wrong in certain ways. So you could have her drill those easy contexts first, then expand to harder and harder contexts. And, of course, don't forget your minimal pairs would also be useful, particularly if it's contextualized, you know. If you could do minimal pairs from things that she's actually talking about. Okay. And your homework, please check the student folder for, it's called week 4 in the student folder. The topic is Bloom's taxonomy. We have a lot of interesting stuff in there. And bring 1 unit or chapter of a textbook. And when I say textbook, I mean a language textbook. So an English textbook from a Hagwon, for example. You can check them out from the resource center on the first floor, or if you're in a pinch, you can ask your teacher if he or she has one laying around for you. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please be kind and rewind. That means you can go back and watch it again. All right. Have a good one.